Hello everyone, and welcome to the presentation. My name is Bailey Monroe, and today I'm going to be discussing my integrated training plan for KIN 585. First, I'll give a statement of my coaching philosophy as it relates to my plan and my goals for the group I'm working with. Then we'll look at a general overview of the sport of swimming, as well as specific athletes I'm working with. Then we'll look at a gap analysis of those athletes and a training plan with some key elements, as well as a general overview of how we can get them to where they need to be. I'll present some sample microcycles, and then we'll finish up by wrapping everything up with a conclusion. Let's look at my coaching philosophy as it relates to my ITP. I want to maximize my impact on the sport of swimming by allowing the greatest possible number of kids to reach their potential, working at a club rather than a center. I'll put everything into my program to produce stable long-term returns exceeding improvement benchmarks and provide ideal athletic development opportunities. But I want to be smart about what I do, and that I want to maximize the total achievement of my athletes in visible events, positioning the 200 and 400 as key events for development, but really targeting 200-meter events and dropping down to the 100 for visible performance, right? Relays are composed of 100 and 200-meter swims on the Olympic stage, so I want to give athletes the skills to be successful and the ones that are going to yield the highest visible performance. The 800 is now an Olympic event, so rather than the 100 to 1500-meter range, I'm looking more at a 100 to 800 and then racing from the 100 to 400, right? Positioning effort as the underlying variable for athletes, in my mind, sets them up for everything else. I want to design the best program that I can possibly give to them, and then they believe in it completely and see what they can do with it, right? But I also have a unique background in computer science that I want to use as a unique advantage, right? At the club level, we don't necessarily have performance scientists or data scientists, but if I'm able to bring that skill set, that can be my competitive advantage. So let's have a look at the sport of swimming as a whole. It's a pretty controlled environment, right? We're looking at competitive pool swimming, not open water. There's a fixed pool length. Olympic pools are 50 meters in length with a narrow temperature band. We've got lane ropes, gutters, and depth facilitating wave elimination. And there's things like the flag, ceiling, or the sky, providing specific utility to backstroke or IM swimmers, helping them swim straight. And it's important when you're going to go to a swim meet that you want to warm up with some backstroke to be able to get a sense of how the route flows so that you can swim straight and not bang into lane ropes. Equipment is largely an individual thing. We've got caps, goggles, and racing suits that you can wear, only with specific materials since the bans in 2009. But what's really interesting is how pools can impact your periodization, in that some pools are going to have equipment that's going to be more competitive and more relevant to the competitive environment, versus some are simply not going to have that. We'll see that on the next slide with some track blocks and backstroke wedges at the Kinsman. But as far as personal equipment goes, suits are recommended only at the senior national level, so the kids know that the training that they do and the skills that they develop make the performance, not the money they're spending on a racing suit. So if we look at U of A East on the left, this is a very warm water 25-yard pool, which is difficult to run with 40 swimmers. But if we want to work on skills like track starts or backstroke starts, we have to periodize that, so that we're doing that at the Kinsman Sports Center, where those are going to be the same equipment pieces that we're actually going to be racing on. So swimming's a very demanding sport because it can be pushed to very high levels, right? And swimmers, the best swimmers in the world, are placing huge physiological demands on their body from every energy system, right? The aerobic foundation allows swimmers to build and maintain technique, and it gives them structural adaptations like a strong heart that can pump a lot of blood through well-developed capillary networks at a high intensity, right? And anaerobic capacity, the needs for that are going to depend on whether you're a sprinter or a long-distance swimmer. Long-distance kids need to be able to accelerate, but sprinter kids really need to be able to access all their energy quickly, right? And everyone is worried about applying their capacities in a powerful way, i.e. time limited to the duration of their event, right? And then when we look at alactic skills, that's very connected to coordination, but also attributes like strength on a relative and absolute basis, mostly through starts and turns, as well as lower body power as expressed through things like vertical jumps. So we want to make sure these games are very functional rather than aesthetic, right? And swimming is a very demanding mentally sport because the mind's got to put the body through this challenging training schedule. Using some terms coined by On the Podium, we're looking for a challenge mindset as well as high levels of resilience that combines a growth perspective with productive thinking and proactive behavior, and interacts with the environment created by the coach to create resilience. Resilience is essential because there's so many different challenges between practices and needs, and you need to be able to refocus and persist. Combine that with swimming is such a technical sport, you need attentional control to be able to develop your technique and refocus when necessary. Now let's look at the technical demands. It's a very economy-driven sport. If you're physiologically gifted, that doesn't mean that you will be successful, right? We can look at it quantitatively by breaking down races into things like distance and time, stroke count, stroke rates, underwater distances in various segments. But if you change one factor, it's going to have an impact on the others. It's a very chaotic system, right? Maybe we're looking at a relative stroke length with respect to height as an indicator of swimming economy, which is how well swimmers can move their body through the water on each individual stroke, right? We can also look at things like stroke length at a given rate, which can basically express intensity, right? So how well can you swim at a given intensity will give you your speed, right? As far as race tactics go, swimming races have fairly stable execution patterns represented as split differentials. For example, the men's 100-meter freestyle has an average differential of 2.02 seconds. If you look at different 25 swimmer partitions, the largest deviation I was able to find was 2.13, the smallest as 1.82. So it's a fairly narrow band, which represents efficient execution, right? But these are an outcome variable that are the sum of so many different physical, psychological, and technical variables. There's such a high economy and skill component, so you want to execute on skills like starts, turns, and finishes, and then basically empty the gas tank as well as you can. The opportunity of working at the club level is a lot of fun, but it comes with some significant limitations. We've got to fight with other clubs and activities for pool space, and we're not able to come in during school hours and train because kids are in school, right? So they have early mornings and late nights, which leads to less recovery, unfortunately. And these athletes are not perfectly yet dialed in because they haven't been developed to be. They need energy for growing, and there's less sleep because they're dealing with things as part of their real life. There's a lack of skill in soft improvement management for things like eating, sleeping, and training, but we need to develop those skills so that they can become elite, right? Our club personally is facing some challenges. We've lost a couple of coaches due to a labor shortage, and some pools are closing down. So essentially, we have one coach and 40 swimmers in one pool, and we're making the best out of it by just presenting the best possible program we can and offering something that's engaging, right? And with being a club, we don't have kids just walking in that are really, really good. We need to recruit a large number of very developmental athletes and retain them and develop them. And I'll do my part on that by offering a very engaging program that kids will want to stick around for. The Canadian swimming environment has a bunch of different levels, but what it comes down to is the foundation of we're not just swimming a single event, we're swimming these multi-day meets, everything from the Olympics all the way down to kid meets like regionals and festivals. You're racing a 2 to 7 day meet and not just a single event. If we look at the bottom, Swimming Canada has released volumes that its swimmers were competing at the World Junior Championships, with some kids swimming from 6.6 to 9.4 kilometers a day, which looks at about 46 kilometers per week. And that's your end taper stage. So you want to be training more than that so you can taper down and actually swim that really well and win a World Junior medal, right? What we have here is a Swimming Canada document showing all the swims that an athlete would have over the course of a week. And these athletes are doing 14 to 15 races, plus warm-ups, plus warm-downs, plus everything in between, right? So we're not just training for a given race, we're training for a swim meet here, okay? And many cultural elements of swimming are localized to the period or place in which your swimmers swim themselves, with the pendulum sort of swinging between volume and intensity, right? And I think when the media looks at swimmers, they look at multi-event stars like Mark Spitz and Michael Phelps, right? Now there's a new breed of athletes coming with lower training volumes and higher intensity, and that creates a temptation to work smarter, not harder. Now, I think it's really, really interesting that the greatest sprinters ever in the sport have not trained on pure sprint programs, and I don't believe that that's a mistake. I believe that that's by design, right? But the club culture that you set is going to be based on your personal values, right? And having something aligned with that, right? Whether it's winning, injury prevention, technique, effort, honesty, or attendance, I believe in using effort and the mind to conquer everything else, and that's what I want my swimmers to know so they can take control of their lives. Now that we've looked at a general overview of swimming, let's look at the athletes I'm working with. I work with Olympian Swim Club, aka OSC's Performance Group, which is a train-to-train group. Currently, they're a little bit older at 13 to 16 than I'd like them to be, and the level isn't quite as high. They're at the provincial to national level right now, but I want to get that age down to basically 12 to 15, right? It's sandwiched between two groups called High Performance, which is train to compete, and Age Group Performance, which is early train to train. Age Group Performance has not seen the development that we would have liked, so now I'm taking over that group as well, which will help me ensure some quality coming to performance, right? But we're looking for kids that'll be girls 12 to 14, boys age 13 to 15 with a high level of skill and aerobic capacity development. So then they pass PHB and I can hit them and develop their aerobic power, right? We're loading them up with something called breakpoint volume, which is essentially the most that they're going to swim throughout their career. And then they're gradually going to master it and increase intensity over time. So ideally we have kids coming in at age 5 to 7 and they'll have somewhere from 5 to 10 years of experience. But with COVID, some kids are a little bit less. So that's what we're working with realistically, and I'm just going to progress that over time so that this group can evolve. So here's a photo of Western Canadian champion Canadian Games selected athlete Brianna White, as well as the rest of the OSC performance group, just for some further context. So let's look at a gap analysis of where the group is and what it can be. In 2011 to 2013, OSC was one of the top clubs in Canada. They won Westerns, and the performance group was a big part of that. Now it mostly relies on high performance, but the club is still in a decent spot. We placed 5th out of 50 teams at 2022 Westerns, which is a decent showing, but I know that we can do better, right? Using the 13-14 age group as a reference, which is sort of central to this group, let's look at some interesting numbers using FINA points, which is a measure of performance. 1,000 points is a world record. 400 is better than 300. 800 is considered elite, 900 you're in an Olympic final, and it just sort of goes from there. So we can see that generally there's been a decay of anywhere from 15 to 30% across the board, right? Girls, it looks like it's more about 20% decay using the female first place, female third place, and female 10th place of OSC swimmers in 2013 versus 2022, and boys fare even worse, honestly, from 27 to 30%. Now, what does that really mean? Well, on a 2.5 minute race of the 200 diameter 200 freestyle, every kid is approximately 10 to 15 seconds slower per 200. So what could be causing that? Is it a physiological bias towards maybe sprinting or maybe there's specialization? It doesn't appear to be that way because there's not like an undue deterioration in a specific area. I personally believe that it's a function of average skill being much lower. Now, it's not their fault. We've been out of the water for the better part of 2 seasons due to COVID, and there's been a tremendous amount of coaching and consistency. I was only hired in August, and now I'm trying to figure out how to basically get everything set up for the future. As far as I can tell, their stroke rates are fine, so the physiology is doing the best it can to support the intensity, but the technique is not necessarily there to be able to raise the physiology to the next level and place those higher demands. So I think that they've got a low relative stroke length and that needs to be developed so they can move themselves through the water better and improve their skill and economy. So these are just an example of some of the statistics available from swim rankings where we can look at 13 to 14-year-old girls in 2013 and 2012 and just sort of put those against each other and look for any trends. So let's look at some key elements that are going to impact the plan as well as how I'm going to monitor them. So we look at energy system training broadly through 3 categories: aerobic, mixed, which includes threshold and high performance endurance, and then anaerobic, which includes more race pace and speed. I found it much easier to actually color code these, which is a system pioneered by a coach named John Urbanchek, and I believe it was actually perfected by a man named Tom Rushton and his dad, Clyde Rushton, who was an excellent swim coach. And what they're doing is they're taking physiological zones and they're just color coding them for ease of use. Now, what I'm doing in my personal approach is I'm combining blue and purple for my season plan, anaerobic capacity and power, and then progressing through that as appropriate. More capacity earlier and then power as we get close to the swim meet. Also doing the same thing for green and gold, and that we're building a lactic capacity and then we're harnessing it to be able to go really fast. This is just an overview of what the color system looks like, as well as how the systems are represented and matched with the color, as well as some interesting notes on set design for swim coaches. So looking more specifically at the values I'm using, what we're calling aerobic, or AE, makes up 60% of the program, mixed is at 30%, and anaerobic is 10%. Within that, we have subzones of white or maintenance work versus pink/development work. Then in mixed, we have threshold versus high performance work, which are fairly even, and then lactate, which we're going to have more lactate compared to alactic work, right? And then what I'm doing on a meso level is I've got it so that all of my phases, there's a relative difference in the content compared to baseline, which is general prep or transition is a very broad period of training. So it makes sense that everything is essentially a baseline, right? Versus in specific prep, we give up a little bit of aerobic to get much more mixed training while maintaining the anaerobic elements. And then as we progress through pre-comp, competition 1, and comp 2, all the volumes are going to be coming down, but the quality of that anaerobic work is going to be going way up. And I look at some other key variables, not just the volumes, but things like aerobic length or anaerobic load, just so that we can sort of get a sense of, is this a really, really focused training load, or is it more of a sort of diffuse, spread out thing that's going to be easier to adapt to, right? We also think about target events for mid to distance or sprint, which will steer the intensities of those training sets. So I've just monitored the development of swimmer energy systems through in-water test sets. This includes the classic 7200s incremental step test going from 60 to 0 beats per minute and 10 bbm steps. You can use that as part of daily monitoring using the first 2 as sort of a basic snapshot, and then the middle 3 200s are a little more glycolytic, so it's going to be a specific snapshot or preparation for some faster sets, right? And we're going to retest that essentially every 3 or 4 weeks after a deload, so we can test metrics like their heart rate, their stroke count, their pace to get a sense of economy more broadly, as well as capacity, right? Are they able to swim faster on a given heart rate, right? If we were looking at anaerobic elements, I don't have access to lactate testing and physiologists, so what I believe is most appropriate is using well-designed anaerobic sets that clearly hit that system and comparing them to themselves, right? As well as using 50 to 200 meter race performances and looking at specific metrics like stroke rate. Are you able to get up to that rate using your coordination, then sustain it using your energetics, right? Or using 25 meter splits to detect deterioration. Now, that's something that can sort of be monitored on a step-by-step basis, but something that can be done both weekly and daily is sport-specific speed using key race segments, starts, turns, and finishes. This can be anywhere from a 5 to 20 meter segment, depending on how raw you're looking at, but obviously there's some technical components too. I think it works best to use 2 to 6 repeats on full recovery, like 1 to 10, remove the best and worst trial for 6, then average it out, right? And you can use that at the start of a week to ensure basic central nervous system or alactic recovery, and kind of cycle through them on a week-to-week basis so you can see skill improvement. Maybe do a mesocycle of turn approaches, and you're really, really targeting that metric. But that's just the way that you can sort of hit that. So as far as strength training goes, we have a great strength conditioning coach that designs the program for us. We've got activation and resistance training and flexibility components in both the dry land and the gym. And because these kids weren't really working out much more than Zoom dry land over COVID, we got to rebuild their athleticism and teach foundational movements like hinging or squatting, right? I think in an ideal world, we'd be progressing through strength, endurance, hypertrophy, strength, and power loaded in a similar way to these energy systems. But right now, what we're doing is we're teaching them how to move and progressively loading them, right? And ideally, we would monitor that using estimated 1 rep max values, using 5 rep max or 8 rep max on things like chin-ups, bench press, back squats, and vertical jumps, which work by British Swimming suggests are really, really important for senior national level performance. And they actually have some really good benchmarks for that. We'd evaluate those specific lift goals at the start and end of those target cycles, but right now it's largely qualitative evaluation by the strength and conditioning coach, Michelle Atkins, and myself. Mental training, we've got a great mental training coach, Aaron Brennan, who comes in every few weeks, but we're developing skills daily. We've got group and individual exercises to develop mental skills, and we actually bring her in to do targeted interventions before, during, and after swim meets, which has been really valuable. I have a weekly focus for every week based on work by Canadian Sport for Life and the Mental Fitness for LTAG. These include goal setting, growth mindset, visualization, mindfulness, breathing, race planning, and debriefing, and we monitor that through kind of ongoing discussion. What I'd like to do in the future is periodize it using some validated psychometric assessments, things like the challenge mindset, right? Breaking down the growth, productive thoughts, and proactive behavior, process orientation or self-regulation to assess learning and flexibility, as well as resilience, which breaks down into mental toughness and just sort of overall mental skills assessments. That's something that we could iterate over 3 cycles. Just do 1 in GPP, 1 in SVP, 1 in comp, rotate through that over 3 cycles. Then we've got a decent psychometric profile of these kids as well as their evolution. In my opinion, tactical training for swimmers is best done by adding it to a level of the foundational skills that we're already doing. So the energy systems are sort of determining the long-term improvement, and then these things that we layer on top are a little more volatile, but also a little bit more useful in the moment, perhaps, right? And this includes not just teaching the skills, but how you use kick counts, stroke rates, breathing patterns, splits. Are you taking some extra kicks because you pushed off a wall a little bit deep? Are you trying to blow past your competition? Are you trying to change your rate in a race? Are you holding your breath to make a touch? Are you going to be descending in a distance event? These are all skills, but used in a strategic way. And ultimately, it comes down to execution and rehearsing the optimal way to do it, but having some flexibility. Say you're coming into a wall, you need to be able to adapt your stroke rate and touch, right? And monitoring this stuff is done on a daily basis in a very set specific way, right? Kick counts, it can be, are they complying to the given kick count? Is the kick count appropriate, right? Are they hitting their stroke count? Is it in a race relevant way? Or are they operating on an efficient frontier of swimming, right? One thing you can do is actually put this into the program by saying that we have a target race kick count. Maybe we're building up to that. We're going kicks -2, kicks -1, kicks -0 by week, or even doing a little bit of overkill training or over distance rather by going kicks +1 and stroke count -1 and building it in that way. We can periodize all of these elements. So in this stage of athlete development, our nutrition instruction is fairly general. We have a dietitian coming 3 times a year in GPP to talk about dietary needs and also addressing the risks of supplements. We encourage whole food consumption at this level, and I like to hand out guidelines from the Sports Nutrition Advisory Committee, where I provide them with the guidance in general prep, a little more specific work on competition mealtime and how to modulate your eating due to training using athletes' plates, and then competition just comes down to executing it. We like to see all our kids having carbs and protein available after swim. We mandate water bottles at every practice, and we schedule consumption, more consumption, especially when we're training in that hot U of A East pool. And I like kids to have a blend of water and limited sports drinks for long sessions, especially when we're swimming for 2 hours and then we're going to the gym for an hour. I want them to get into an anabolic state as soon as possible. So just making sure we're getting some food in and kickstarting that. Here's some useful resources that I really like that include the athletes plates from CSI Pacific, as well as the snack recommendations. These can be easily handled at swimmers electronically in accordance with my periodization plan, with laminated copies around the pool so they're ever present. Related to nutrition, we have recovery and regeneration, and we like to focus on what's cheap, simple, and effective. Things like scheduling sleep. We've got our morning practice only on a Thursday, and the rest of them are on a weekend. That way we can have really short terms on our sleep debt and repaid as soon as possible, right? And just like before, I like to give out the Canadian Sport for Life guidelines. We're looking for 56 to 64 plus hours per week, and we provide guidance to parents on how to schedule their routine to get to Thursday AM, because we want to have kids there, right? I don't judge them for missing that morning practice because I assume it must be for a good reason, right? I'm soft on the exception, but hard on the direction, and I want them to maximize the benefits of their training, right? Initially, it just comes down to setting up their home situation, sleep hygiene, then bring that into swim meets, and then just executing it as best as we can. As far as physical recovery, we have mobility and flexibility as part of our dryland program, which we do more of leading into things like specific prep and competition phase when swimming is more demanding. We have access to things like a hot tub, which is more of a fun social thing, but also obviously supports circulation. Here's some excerpts that I like to hand out to swimmers and parents that I believe have helped them in the past. So when we're tapering for key events, there's a couple different paths we can go down, right? I noticed that there's sort of 2 different groups of swimmers within my group. One responds well to volume and perform better with less of a drop, and these are mostly mid to distance swimmers, primarily 200 meter plus, versus another group is actually a little more sprinty. They perform well with intensity, and they continue to get better through a drop, right? So mid to distance kids, we're going to maintain more volume and then just basically spare the glycogen for racing on a short 7 to 10 day rest with a little more consistency before that, versus the sprintier kids, they're going to drop volume earlier so they can get some rest and put more quality into their training and then focus on intensity. That's more of a 2 to 3 week timeline, as we'll see later, okay? Kick, pull, and swim are broken down just like every other part of the program. So kicks maybe 25%, pulls 20%, swim is 55%. Then you can split that down further into other components, right? But rather than getting too crazy, I just lump them back into endurance, quality, and speed as sort of a 3-zone model, which you can also split all this further into stroke components, right? Free and back offset each other. Butterfly is good for muscular endurance. Breaststroke's a pretty specific thing, which is why it's weighted so lightly. And we see the same thing in kick. If the dolphin kick's used in every stroke, flutter kick is very transferable, and whip kick is a very specific sort of thing. So as far as equipment goes, we like to have a blend of it. In the future, I would like to periodize that more through the season, but right now it's sort of periodized throughout the career. So let's look at the training plan overview. One thing that I think is really unique is this is actually algorithmically generated using some parameters, things like how much time we spend in each phase, how many cycles, how many weeks off, as well as all the things that I just talked about for components, right? We keep track of every practice, camp, meets, and everything else that's relevant to the plan, and we're looking at a very conventional triple periodization with special attention to maintaining anaerobic capacity early in the season so we have something to work with later when the specificity increases. Initially, we go long to short to build these kids back into it, but then we have 2 cycles that are a little more short to long to continually build as much speed and intensity as possible. Here we have a look at the dashboard part of the sheet where we have an overview of the group, club, start date, birthday, everything that you essentially need to know. And we see every week of the season as well as some key events. Our 3 real peak meets of the season are JP Pacific meet, Western Canadian Champs, and then either summer provincials or nationals. And we have 3 setup meets: Christmas Cracker, Provincial Champs, or the Edmonton Keanu Invitational is meets to qualify for that, right? Each of these are going to be sort of long to short periodization with general prep, specific prep, pre-comp, comp, and transition phase. And there's a progressive increase in specificity throughout the season, given that the first cycle, we're just getting them back from COVID, and then we're actually trying to get them to perform really well by the end of the season. And we can see ideas like a general idea behind the weeks in the context of their macro, their phases, and how they've been grouped into mesos for loading and deloading, right? We have technical focus, mental focus, energetic parameters such as set lengths, estimated loads, and target events. We can see aerobic set lengths build up through the cycle, then accumulate the anaerobic load, and then increase quality as we taper down. There's more of a gradual build up on the first cycle, then we build a little more into it using the speed we built previously to get into the intensity right away. And the lactate size is just built through the lactate load divided by anaerobic set size. So it's progressive from lots of small touches to fewer big hits that take more time to recover from. That will be a progressive overload that will drive adaptation. Here we get in the meat of the plan with temporal elements up top, desired training volumes, and then calculated training volumes based on the algorithm, right? And this is actually just validated on the right-hand side with some Swimming Canada and NCCP recommendations. This goes from a macro level using big variables all the way to the zone component combinations, right? I can tell you how much breaststroke speed pull we're doing with pull boy high, or how much quality kick would be dolphin kick versus flutter. But on the macro level, we see jumps in aerobic volume, then jumps in mixed volume, and then the quality of the race pace increases as everything pulls back. And this is a look at the algorithmic periodization of testing and non-physical skills. For example, if we want something every time we start GPP, then on the first week of every GPP, the algorithm places that test. That's noted as GPP-S for start, M for middle, E for end. So, for example, competition rules and anti-doping, that needs to be revisited near the end of pre-competitive. So that's known as PCE. So these are all described on the left-hand side. The pieces like technical analysis, dryland screening, intentional control, and equipment, everything is generally periodized, and then the specifics of that are handled when I design my microcycles. Now, I don't blindly just accept everything from the computer. I personally review every week of the training cycle multiple times, as the start, as it nears, as we do it, and then in hindsight. The computer is just a tool, but I think it has a lot of advantages. Here's an overall look at the swimming volume across the different energetic zones, and we can see there's 3 different cycles on weeks 15, 28, or 33, and 47 respectively. Things like changes in lactate volume are very subtle, but we can see a difference in the pink volume, the aerobic volume shooting up, and then the mixed volume is shooting up, right? See pink, then mixed, pink, and then mixed, right? And then the intensity on the lactate work is going to increase as well, right? To get that drive of adaptation due to diminishing returns, right? And I want to note that this red and orange line are actually stacked. So this is actually twice as high and would be a little bit more visible, which we'll see on the next slide. Okay, so when we group into the macro levels of endurance, quality, or speed, it becomes more visible how there's a progression from endurance here to quality and intensity, right? Progression of endurance to then later spiking in quality and intensity. Once again, endurance here and then spiking quality and intensity a little bit later. And then the intensity feels very different when it's evenly distributed versus when it's stacked into these grueling workouts. For some sample micros, we have a general prep here where we're laying the foundation. This is a sample week 3 from the first cycle where we're not even on our full training cycle of workouts, right? We're building volume in GPP with the context of an aerobic capacity meso. We're looking for IM stroke efficiency with focus on stroke count, teaching basic visualization, right? Main sets are only 3.2K in 55 minutes with a 50% anaerobic load. Distance stuff geared towards the mile versus very short lactate geared towards the 125 meter reps that won't be too intense, right? 2 dry lands, largely technical in nature. Athletes are able to maintain their anaerobic capacity due to the lactate work, and we're swimming once a day, so they'll be able to adapt to the aerobic work quite easily. Looking at specific prep, we see an increase in specificity and training intensity, right? This week I wanted a blip in intensity, and I knew there'd be a drop in volume due to having the OSC last chance meet this weekend. So we're in specific prep, transitioning to aerobic power mesocycle. We're changing gears through rate and applying lots of feedback. This is a 44-kilometer week with an average of 6.2K for practice. Kids swam well at the previous meet, but I felt like I needed to develop their underwater stroke characteristics a little bit more. So there's a reduction of aerobic set length and an increase in anaerobic training volume with elements of some breath control as well, right? So although volume's up from that first GPP example, it's actually a decrease from the second cycle's GPP because they had already been built up, right? So we're up to 44K in 75 minutes, which is actually a drop from 5.3K in 90 minutes, which would be a couple weeks before this, but the groups are targeted to the 400 to develop that real aerobic power. We got 3 dry lands this week and skipping the Sunday workout in favor of a swimming. Tuesday PM aerobic is similar in length to what we saw earlier, but the Wednesday lactate hit has doubled in size, and that Wednesday PM is a real key workout of the week because 800 meters of intense lactate work is going to be very challenging, right? So I front loaded the week with intensity so that we're able to swim out through these days. This is a big deload compared to the Wednesday, and then they're going to be able to swim through on Saturday and swim well on Sunday, where I'm expecting them to do their warm-ups, warm-downs, and everything in between with their best efforts. So looking at pre-competitive, we see the volume has dropped quite a bit, right? We're down to 35K per week. We're heading to an anaerobic power cycle for some big volatile adaptations. We're looking at about 5K per workout. The quality is way higher, right? Aerobic sets are down to 3.5K an hour. Anaerobic distance is down a little bit, but the focus is on 100s and 200 pace, so the intensity is way up, right? Tuesday was very light and technical with some pure speed elements, and then we're hitting big lactate set on Wednesday, big on Friday, big on Saturday, right? With everything else simply supporting that, right? The weight sessions are doing a lot of rolling out and recovery to support the highly intense swimming, so everything is built around those Tuesday, Friday, and Sunday workouts, right? There's no competition to worry about besides the racing going on in those sessions. And in the competition phase, we see athletes are really dialed back to allow their body to recover and perform, right? We see the endpoint of the gradual volume reduction. We're down from we've gone down from 35K to 31K down to 24K, massive aerobic deload, anaerobic deload with super high quality, 100, 200 pace, some very different things. We see that we're swimming out on Tuesday, short speed on Wednesday, heats and finals experience on Thursday, right? Then swimming out, light touch on lactate here, and then after that, everything is just neural and recovery oriented, right? So every swim is just so dialed in, and the work is done not in the practices, but in the rest between them. All of our dry lands are rolling out flexibility with a little bit of short, sharp stuff to stimulate the central nervous system, right? Transitional phase is largely like general prep. Volume is low at 25K a week, swimming once per day, so the workouts are more dense and they can swim out. right? We see that we've got a Monday off, we're swimming through Tuesday, progressing a little bit Wednesday, swimming through Thursday, and then we're going to end with something a little bit fast just to start to get them excited. With the fins on, that will allow them to basically go fast and set some goals for the next cycle without having any pressure. So immediately after the meet, we have passive recovery leading to some progressive swim outs, little taste of speed, and then giving something to bite into later. Let's wrap up the presentation by going over the highlights of what we talked about today. What I'm aiming to do with my integrated training plan is give the largest possible athletes a chance to become elite. I believe the structure and quality of the training plan makes up much of the long-term trajectory of the group, while elements like psychology can make a bigger difference on the individual basis. And I want to capture as much excess improvement as possible while allowing for individual flexibility so I can produce optimal long-term results. Swimming, you can put in so much work, but how do we get the benefit of that work in the longest term possible, right? Through sufficient work, rest, and progressive overload, we achieve great things over time. I'm rebuilding the train-to-train section of OSC, and having direct control over my ideal group of 12 to 15-year-old kids with technical direction allows me to manage their development, and by improving their skills and economy, they'll be able to swim faster and therefore complete more volume. Previously, I tried to make swimmers faster by swimming them more, but now I'm swimming them more by making them faster with improved skills. Using my algorithmic system to design seasonal plans based on macro-level variables, I get to experiment and change things quickly, in addition to having everything tracked in a meaningful way. Periodization is not a solved problem, and lots of different valid frameworks exist, but I'm applying general principles to the periodization of various elements to provide a starting point that things can be improved from year after year through my clever software tools and spreadsheets. But I'm not blinded by the virtues of technology. At the end of the day, I get to go out on deck and present the program to the athletes I work with, and in that way, it all comes down to the relationships we build with ourselves and the athletes. Applying a rational set of human eyes to everything we do allows us to get the benefits of technology without becoming a slave to it. That concludes the oral presentation of my integrated training plan. Thank you very much for watching, and please let me know if you have any questions about the content.